The brave new world of medicine in an advert. If you tear a tendon, don't worry, the spare part is already at hand. But few of us know that many medical implants are made from dead bodies. A billion-dollar market with a dirty secret. Because there aren't enough donors around, the medical industry illegally butchers cadavers in Eastern Europe. In the Ukraine, pathologists are accused of harvesting body parts under scandalous circumstances.
On the day of the funeral, I saw that my son had cuts on his wrists, very deep cuts. They had cut out body parts.
We've teamed up with Ukrainian and American colleagues to investigate the scandal. In court files, we find clues for an international network of body snatchers. We want to find out more.
Все, отлично. Да, он подправит. Сейчас давай тогда пока...
Ну давай, это заходи уже, я в студию зашел.
Alexander Lini is a reporter and presenter for the Ukrainian TV channel ICTV. Only a few dare to speak up in a country without real freedom of the press. As a Ukrainian, Alexander can get us into places that otherwise would be off limits for us. Without him, we wouldn't be able to make this film. Recently, he even managed to film the conditions in the Institute of Forensic Medicine. There are rumors that cadavers are systematically butchered in a room next door that we weren't allowed to film. This is not about organs, but about so-called tissue. Everything worth recycling is removed from the corpses. Bones, muscles, tendons. Often even the skin is removed from the bodies. Worldwide, millions of body parts are turned into medical products every year. For example, granules for jawbone reconstruction or implants for spinal surgery. Ukrainian bones are bestsellers in the West.
What was the public's reaction?
Никакой реакции. Никакой реакции, потому что, все сделали вид, и представители...
There was absolutely no reaction. Our health ministry, like everybody else caught up in the scandal, acted as if this report had never been broadcast.
Сюжета не было в эфире. И было огромное количество статей с заголовками там громких.
A tabloid newspaper picked up the issue. They wrote, Ukraine deals with human flesh, but the authorities swept it all under the rug.
Информации никакой.
We're on our way to one of the centers of the body trade, the Institute of Forensic Medicine in Kiev. In the Ukraine, autopsies are performed routinely every time somebody dies, a relic of socialist times when the government even tried to keep the dead under control. Well-stocked morgues. This is what makes the Ukraine so attractive for body snatchers. For weeks, we tried to get interviews with those responsible, and for weeks, we were fobbed off. Now we try a more direct approach.
Уважаемый, а что мы снимаем? Здрасте. Здрасте. Вот так зашли, хвосты снимаем. А что это за...
We ask for the head of the institute.
Да? Режимный? А что тогда турникеты?
He's not here right now. When can we meet him? No idea.
Охраны нет вообще.
His deputy makes it clear to us that he doesn't want a film crew sniffing around.
Не знаю. Я знаю перечень режимных объектов.
Do you have a filming permit? No, you haven't even replied to our emails. You know you can't film here. so get out, fast. Here in Kiev alone, 8,000 corpses are processed at the Institute of Forensic Medicine each year. What exactly happens with them is a well-guarded secret. We continue our search for clues on the internet. On the website of the US-American Food and Drug Administration, we find a database. It's a list of Ukrainian forensic institutes that process human tissue and send it abroad. The evidence for a nationwide network for harvesting corpses.
Donetsk, Gorlovka, Ivano-Frankovsk, Kharkov. Next.
A list, there's another 10.
Херсон, Киев, судебно-медицинская экспертиза, например.
Then a surprise. If you want to call a Ukrainian corpse dealer, you have to dial a phone number starting with 49.
Бюро судебно-медицинской экспертизы. Номер, код не Украины.
Not a single Ukrainian phone number. They all have the German prefix 49.
After 49, the number continues with 9134, the area code for the German town of Neunkirchen. The number belongs to the German company Tütingen. They make implants from body parts.
Among its many wonders, the human body possesses remarkable healing power. That's what drives the people of RTI Biologics.
RTI is Tütingen's American parent company. They use Galitzy advertising to sell, for example, Achilles tendons made from cadavers.
Sterilization technologies to repair and facilitate.
There's a legal market for such products. For example, tissue donors in Germany can assume that their body parts are processed correctly by a network of non-profit tissue banks and processing companies. But some commercial outfits like Tütingen and RTI make a profit with human tissue.
Fracture and joint repair,
They get their raw material from Eastern Europe and sell their products around the world.
Why do you think companies choose to process body parts from the Ukraine?
Ну, я уже сказал, в принципе, потому что у нас, видно, проще всего как бы обойти закон в этом плане, да?
Because obviously our justice system is not working properly, and it's very difficult to control what is legal and what is illegal.
В Германии, там, может быть, или в Америке, за этим более серьезный контроль.
In Europe or America, you have much tighter controls. There's a lot of money in the tissue market, so our forensic pathologists are happy to get involved in this business.
Ну, такие вещи.
In the future, we want you to donors that are under 66 years old, 60 up to 65.
This is an excerpt from a training video for forensic pathologists. An American expert teaches Ukrainian colleagues. He explains which parts of the corpses are particularly valuable, how to take them out correctly, and how to package them for further processing. To at least maintain a pretense of decency for the funeral, plastic rods are pushed into the dead body to stabilize it. Because the authorities in Kiev turned down our requests for more information, we travel 400 kilometers to the east, to the industrial town of Krivoy Rog. In 2008, prosecutors started investigations against body snatchers in Krivoy Rog. The tissue harvesting was stopped and a court case was opened. Alexander has learned that the court files could tell us more about the scandal. After half a day of negotiations and frequently mentioning public interest, the judge is ready to talk in front of the camera.
Дело, я так понимаю, уже в принципе шло к завершению, да, рассмотрения?
She says that the defendant was the head of the Department of Forensic Medicine. He was accused of butchering dead bodies without permission and deceiving relatives. He died shortly before the verdict, and the case was closed without any convictions. We ask whether the evidence would have been sufficient for a conviction. She can only tell us this much. There is a long list of victims. Most of them had indeed signed a form stating that tissue can be removed from the bodies of their relatives. The only question is, how have they been tricked? And then the judge wants to prove that she really tried to investigate the corpse scandal. Surprisingly, she suddenly allows us to read the court documents. Here we find evidence for the involvement of the international medical industry. Again and again, the documents mention Tütingen, the German subsidiary of the American company RTI. Page after page of body parts that were harvested for the international market.
You have now seen these files for the first time. What have you learned?
Когда я первый раз заглянул в уголовное дело, которое здесь слушалось в этом суде,
the real surprise for me is the extent of the scandal.
Этого бизнеса меня очень сильно поразили.
In this district alone, pathologists have taken out around 1,000 body parts per month and sent them to Kiev.
Частей тела, которые были отправлены в Киев, которые были собраны здесь.
These aren't isolated incidents. The records show very clearly that corpses were butchered systematically, sometimes more, sometimes less. But this is obviously big business, and most body parts were shipped to Germany.
Месяц отправлялось в Киев, и, соответственно, потом в Германию.
In the court files, we find the names and addresses of some of the witnesses. This leads us to a couple who testified in the trial against the forensic pathologist. A suburb of Krivoy Rog. After some hesitation, the Malish family agrees to do an interview. On the 9th of April 2008, their son Sergei committed in the garage of the apartment block. He was 19. What happened after that was a further shock for the parents that they still haven't managed to overcome.
Вызвали милицию, естественно, приехали милиция приехала и...
When we found Sergei's body, we called the police immediately. They came very quickly and brought people from the Department of Pathology with them.
Протокол там этот самый.
While the police interrogated me, the forensic pathologist took my weeping wife to the side and shoved some forms in her face.
Разрешение на изъятие органов.
Когда брали показания у мужа, милиция.
It all happened so fast, I didn't understand. Two women gave me a paper to sign. For an autopsy, I asked. Yes, they said. I did ask my husband, why do they want to open his body? It's obvious that he's hanged himself.
Я еще мужа просила, говорю, зачем его вскрывать? Тут же и так понятно, что случилось. В день похорон. Я видела, что у него на руках раны.
On the day of the funeral, I saw that my son had cuts on his wrists, very deep cuts. And my husband said that they had cut out body parts.
Они увидели, что здоровый молодой парень, есть что брать.
They probably thought, this is a young guy, we can take a lot out.
И замали.
Скажи мне, мама, сколько стоит моя жизнь? Моя жизнь это драма, моя душа несется ввысь. Скажи мне, мама, сколько стоит моя жизнь?
Just before his death, Sergei had recorded this video, an illustrated letter of farewell.
Скажи мне, мама, сколько стоит моя жизнь?
The fact that the forensic pathologists cut open Sergei's body after his death is a desecration to his mother. And the idea that the bones of her son were sold all over the world is still unbearable for her.
Моя душа несется ввысь.
Я сейчас просила, говорю, пишите сами, я подпишу, что там.
I would never have consented, but they wanted the papers signed so quickly.
В ходе следствия объясняли нам в СБУ, прокуратуре.
In court, we learned that they had sold body parts as anatomical material.
Я считаю, что людьми их вообще назвать нельзя.
Human beings don't do such things, taking advantage of our tragedy.
Думать о тех,
They make money with our misfortune.
One single body is worth up to $250,000 if it's exploited and marketed systematically. So the dead serve as spare part shops for the living, and as a treasure trove for dubious profiteers. We visit our Ukrainian colleague in his office in Kiev. He shows us why the authorities don't stop these macabre acts. BioImplant, the Ukrainian company making money by harvesting body parts for RTI and Tutagen, belongs to the Ministry of Health. So the controlling authority controls itself. Therefore, nobody is interested in stopping this lucrative business. For over a decade, Igor Alashenko has been organizing the supply of bodies. This has made him a wealthy man. Here he tells forensic pathologists that they've got nothing to worry about. He says that even the Pope has an organ donor card, donating body parts for the sick. This is an act of love and affection. We would have liked to speak about this in person with Mr. Alashenko. For weeks, we've been asking for an interview with the Ukrainian key player in the body trading business.
Здравствуйте. Это Александр Ильиных, журналист телекомпании CTV. Скажите, я с господином Олещенко смог бы поговорить?
This is the third time we've been trying him today.
Я понял. Хорошо, я перезвоню тогда.
And
Спасибо.
again,
Да,
Alexander is fobbed off by the assistant.
Постоянно, как бы он или в командировке, или он куда-то уехал.
Again, she said that he's away on business. This seems to be a very long business trip because every time I call him, he's not there. I've never met him personally. They seal him off completely.
Не видел, как бы за это время.
Those responsible in the Ukraine are playing hard to get. But what about their international business partners? We continue our search in the German town of Neunkirchen. Here, the Ukrainian body parts are sterilized and turned into medical implants. Tutagen agreed to do an interview. Proudly, the new American CEO presents their products.
So start with our best seller, which is the particulate. We sell the particulate, which is cancellous, and it's derived from primarily the iliac crest in the hip, as well as the femoral head. We use this particulate to fill voids left in bone from hip surgery, from knee surgery. We also use quite a bit in dental, where it's used to fill socket. We have an unparalleled track record of success, safety, efficacy, dependability. We absolutely respect the gift of donation. You see it in everything we do, from the consent process to processing and how we handle the donor families.
When we reveal that we've seen quite the opposite in the Ukraine, Tutogen's CEO asks a representative of the American parent company, RTI, to the table.
He didn't have the time to come today. He asked me to show it to you.
We explain about the court documents in Krivoy Rog and play back the testimonies of the witnesses.
Мужа просила, говорю, зачем его вскрывать? Тут же и так понятно, что случилось. Я еще спросила, говорю, пишите сами, я подпишу, что там. Они говорят, надо, чтобы было написано вашей рукой. Прошло уже 40 дней. К нам пришел человек с СБУ.
These are the statements showing that the Ukrainian partners of RTI and Tutogen use dirty methods to trick relatives. Their aim? To source body parts for the international market.
So this was just one of several things they did. Many people told the similar cases. I just wanted to ask you about your impressions when you see it.
It's very sad and disappointing. I think what that is showing is that families are not possibly fully understanding what they're being asked to consent for. They're not thinking correctly, they're not thinking straight, and then they are...
But in a situation like this, you cannot think correctly when
well,
your son
sometimes they just
committed
say no, and sometimes they regret that, sometimes they say yes, and sometimes they regret that. It's terribly sad for families when that happens, terribly sad. And we understand that, and
these are tricks they use just to get the signature on the paper.
But I don't really believe that. And if you understood the numbers of donors versus the numbers of people that die, there are a tiny proportionate number of donors, which is why we believe that if it were more culturally understood, this would not be new to them. They would be prepared for these kinds of questions, and this is where we believe that...
But the problem lies in the people in your partners who come and tell and show them the papers in a situation like this. In Germany, it would be absolutely forbidden to act in this way.
To show them papers for consent?
To come to a mother whose son just committed suicide 1 hour ago and show them papers and say, no, please sign it?
The timing is more critical when people don't understand what's happening. And I think to Robbie's point, you know, the more awareness, the more education, the more they understand what's happening, the better they are prepared to answer the questions, to make their response.
But do I understand you right that you only see the problem on the side of the families who don't understand it? Isn't it a problem of your partners who act in this way?
No, not at all. I'm not at all blaming the families. It's very saddening to us when it happens in our industry, because we're here to help recipients and to serve donor families' wishes, not to go against donor families' wishes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Tissue is then packaged, and bone allografts are terminally sterilized in the final package. Bone allografts are distributed to surgeons sterile.
In the adverts of RTI, everything looks neat and tidy.
The BioCleanse process...
The message is clear. Products made from body parts are safe and clean.
Providing a clean scaffold to facilitate bone remodeling. Safety and innovation, such as BioCleanse, RTI is committed to providing better options for surgical patients.
We're continuing our research in New York. America is the biggest market for human tissue. The US tissue industry has an annual turnover of more than $1 billion. And RTI is one of its biggest players. In the United States, doctors perform more than 1 million tissue transplants every year. Implants like this one are used, as in this case, for knee operations, or hip surgery and spinal fusions. Human tissue is a bestseller, but the demand far outstrips the supply. Here in New York, only 18% of the population are registered as organ or tissue donors. So the tissue industry constantly thinks about new ways of sourcing raw material. And some companies more interested in making a profit than following the law are willing to use criminal methods to get hold of body parts. A few years ago, a gruesome story hit the headlines. A failed dental surgeon had illegally stolen body parts in funeral homes. He had ripped apart 1,000 cadavers and sold their parts to tissue banks around the country. Michael Mastromarino was at the heart of the scandal. He had the idea to harvest body parts in morgues. He worked with funeral directors, whom he paid $1,000 per body. His company supplied raw material to tissue banks. One of his biggest customers was RTI. It was a runaway success. The snag was that Mastromarino didn't care to ask relatives for their consent. He replaced the stolen bones with plastic pipes so families wouldn't notice they were missing. In many cases, he falsified consent forms and didn't care about the medical history of the bodies. We've traveled to meet William Hale, a former New York City police detective. A few years ago, he had surgery on his spine after a car accident. A bone part was inserted in his neck that Mastromarino had taken out of a cadaver and sold on to RTI for processing. Some months later, William Hale got a letter that changed his life.
I just was going to get the mail, like every day. Got a letter from the New York State Department of Health, and it said in there that the bone part that was in my neck came from this cadaver, and this cadaver was positive for hepatitis C. And that was pretty much how I found out that there was something wrong with it. Then I was like, what's going on? And then I found out more.
Hale endured monthly blood tests for a year, but luckily he didn't test positive for hepatitis C. His case was dismissed in court, but he still worries about his future health because of the implant in his neck.
Who knows how long it was going on for, and if it's happened other times that we don't even know about. Nobody knows unless you get caught. And I'm sure this would have kept going on and on and on until, if the people never got caught. But, I guess when greed sets in, that's when things slip up.
As a police officer, William Hale dealt with drug dealers and arms smugglers. But he says nothing had prepared him for the ruthlessness of Mastromarino and his business partners.
This was a reputable company, so it was registered with the government to do business. They got to be, certified by the government. And, you would kind of feel at ease at that point that, wow, this place has been checked out, they're legit. And I'm sure they were legit for many years. But it just comes down to where there's money to be made, somebody's going to make it.
Michael Mastromarino is serving up to 50 years in prison. He says he wants to apologize to the victims, but he also feels that he's been unfairly treated. He says the big tissue processors like RTI are also to blame because they pushed him to get more and more raw material.
My tissue was sold before I had it. In the beginning, they helped me with everything. They were the ones that gave me the paperwork. They were the ones that showed me what I needed to fill out. They were the ones that gave me the instrumentation. They paid for all the supplies. They wanted the tissue, they wanted the bone, and they were going to do anything possible to make sure that we were successful in doing that.
As far as you can tell, did any of those processors ever check a single donor file to confirm the information was accurate?
In the beginning, when all this was set up, they said none of the paperwork was going to be verified. You could slice it any way you want, but at the end of the day is, I knew and they knew that the paperwork wasn't going to be verified.
How big financially is this industry?
It's a huge industry, and I think I myself sit here, I'm in prison, and given what transpired over these past 4 years, I think the industry as a whole has a tendency of making themselves out to be more altruistic than what they really are.
Among its many wonders, the human body possesses remarkable healing power. And RTI Biologics is dedicated to complementing that power through innovations in biologics.
The tissue industry likes to point out that its products are only used for surgery that is medically necessary. But even that's a lie, as we found out.
And other tissues to help people live fuller, healthier lives.
This fasciolata. Fasciolata is recovered from it's the covering around muscle tissue, and this is human in nature, human derived. This material is used for a number of purposes, but our primary use for it clinically is for head and neck repairs. So for dural repairs, when they have surgical repairs they have to do to the cranium, they will use this as a covering to protect.
I heard it's also used for plastic surgery in nose operations, for example, too.
No, we don't use this for plastic surgery. The only plastic surgery product that we utilize, we ship to Asia. We do offer this product for example, for breast reconstruction. So then there's a cancer surgery and it has to be completely reconstructed. And so, we wouldn't consider that cosmetic in nature.
No body parts for cosmetic surgery? We heard something different and went to Hamburg in northern Germany to find out more. One of the leading plastic surgeons here is willing to talk to us about human tissue. The surgeon has asked us not to be shown. The subject is not very helpful in attracting new customers. This patient is willing to pay 6,000 euros for a nicer nose. Here we see something that doesn't exist, according to Tütingen. Their products being used in a beauty clinic.
Do you often use human tissue?
Yes, of course, regularly.
Funny, Tütingen told us they wouldn't sell their products to plastic surgeons.
But we order it on a regular basis without any problems.
Is it only you who uses this material, or do your colleagues use it too?
We all use that. It's standard procedure.
Do you tell your patients?
Would you undergo surgery if you knew that you get an implant from a corpse?
So, no explanation?
No, because from a medical point of view, it's unproblematic.
And morally or legally? Aren't you obliged to let your patients know?
Oh, well, good question. Honestly, I don't know.
The young woman who gets a new nose here is an exception. She's a nurse herself, knows about tissue transplants, and has no problem with the fact that we filmed the procedure.
So now I take this piece of fascia lata. This tissue was taken from the leg of a donor. Then I cut it the way I want it and put it in the nose. In the end, it has exactly the shape the patient wants. Wonderful.
Apart from a corpse, to remodel a nose. For such superfluous surgery, the tissue industry butchers dead people. Once again, we're filming with our Ukrainian colleague in Kiev, because we want to know more about how the tissue industry gets its raw material. In the court files, Alexander has found another name and address of a relative who testified against the pathologist, and who can talk about how the body snatchers go about their business. Valery Kuriev works as an assistant for a Ukrainian politician. His mother was also cut up by the corpse traders.
Русь, привет.
Даже подумал, что это просто какие-то, может быть, мягкие ткани, я не знаю.
When my sister went to pick up the body from the pathology department, she almost fainted. Our mother's body had large scars from head to toe. Obviously, they had sold her bones.
Мама, в принципе, болела сердцем.
They used a trick to make Valerie sign the forms. Because they knew that his mother was a nurse, they told him they would like to take some tissue samples for research that would be important for the development of new drugs. After he had signed, the corpse was butchered.
Почем такие гвоздички?
10 гривен букет. Букет, одна ветка.
Одна веточка?
Да.
Valerie still blames himself for signing the authorization papers. He's one of many who were deceived. Bullying relatives and falsifying documents, obviously standard procedure in Ukrainian morgues.
Позже, конечно, я уже узнал, что некоторые люди этим доверием таких людей, как я.
Later, I learned that the forensic pathologists had abused my trust. They turned this into a business.
Ну что ж, Бог им судья.
Let God be their judge.
Или не судья. Может быть, это кому-то помогло. Обидно только, что
They say tissue donation is a charitable act.
в благотворительных целях, а на самом деле
But now I know
бизнес получился.
it's a business,
Не совсем белый.
a dirty one.
But how exactly is this business organized? Once again, we're in Krivoy Rog, a hospital on the outskirts, one of the centers for sourcing the bodies. Even our Ukrainian colleague Alexander is not very comfortable about being here with a camera. According to the court documents, forensic pathologists used to butcher hundreds of bodies under dubious circumstances in this building and sent their parts abroad. Directly across from the morgue, a funeral director has set up shop. He's been watching for years what's been going on. The court files say that people were given vouchers for grave decorations if they allowed tissue to be removed from the bodies of their relatives.
Николай, скажите, вот в Киеве тоже подобная ситуация была. Там
How did that work? Did people come to you and get decorations for their vouchers?
купоны на приобретение вот таких вот, как у вас, товаров.
Ну, дело в том, что это неправильно.
No, that's not true. My company is private, but the vouchers are a state business. One of the guys from the morgue came up with that. He got rich. The vouchers were a small thank you for relatives who had donated corpses for tissue harvesting.
Вы не знаете, как часто отсюда забирают?
How often were the body parts picked up?
Я так понял, там по звонку все.
Whenever they called and said, "We have fresh material," once a month, sometimes every week. Then a truck came and picked up the container with the tissue material.
Я ж не буду тут стоять и смотреть за ними, понимаешь?
Как вы считаете, вот когда у трупов изымают ткани костные и так далее, и потом на этом делают...
What do you think about taking parts from dead bodies and selling them?
Если согласие родственников, а чё бы нет?
Obviously, that's not right. If the family agrees to have tissue removed from the dead body, and the deceased didn't have AIDS or tuberculosis, then I think it's okay. If you can help others with it, then why not? But they ended up taking stuff out of every dead body without asking any questions. They downright butchered people and made big money. That's obviously not the way to do it.
In the Ukraine, like in most other countries, only a few families allow the bodies of their loved ones to be cut up for tissue removal. The court papers detail the tricks the body snatchers used to get their hands on the valuable raw material anyway. Once, a worker died in a factory, and his boss carelessly signed the consent form. "17 relatives who felt cheated have testified in court against the accused forensic pathologist. One of them is Lyudmila Shakshina. During the trial, she learned that her stepfather's bones were apparently shipped abroad.
Завел кабинет и сказал, что нам надо взять вашего отца костный мозг.
In the morgue, the boss took me aside and said, "We'd like to take bone material from your father." I said, but he worked in a coal mine for 23 years. He was an alcoholic and had smoked all his life. His bones must be totally rotten. But he said that didn't matter. The boss said it's very simple. Either you consent to the removal or you don't get the body for the burial. What should I have done? I just signed.
И вот еще по поводу того, что вот эта деталь, где...
You saw the accused pathologist later in court.
Сразу труп. А вы были на суде, да?
Конечно.
А там свидетельствовал Камолов?
Да.
Yes, he had 2 lawyers with him.
And what did he say?
He denied everything.
Мой почерк же показали.
They had the evidence right there in their files, but he still denied everything. And not just in my case, but in 30 other cases too. The courtroom was full, but he said it's all untrue. Were the statements of all the witnesses wrong or what?
Все говорят, получается неправда.
When you take the tibia with all of the tissues.
So just like Mastro Marino in America, Ukrainian doctors apparently removed tissue from diseased bodies. And just like him, they seemingly ignored the fact that patients may become ill when they receive implants made from infected tissue. Tissue companies always say that the donor's medical history is checked and that the strictest hygiene standards are met. But the reality is obviously quite different. By now we know that it's not easy to get those responsible for the cadaver scandal on camera. Of course, all the forensic pathologists in Krivoy Rog turned down our interview requests.
Здрасте, давно не виделись.
So, we decide to pay a surprise visit to the deputy director of the institute.
Ну, о той истории, что мы с вами тогда общались. С немецкими коллегами.
I've got some colleagues here from Germany.
Do you have a filming permit?
Имею право обратиться к вам в любой момент и без любого запроса.
No, why should I? You're an employee of the state. I'm a journalist and I can always turn to you with my questions.
But if you had told me before, I would have shaved for you.
Здрасте. А можете рассказать, как было организовано?
Seriously, we've got a few questions. Tell us how a biopsy is organized and what role tutagen plays.
Биоимпланту, а потом тутагену.
You have to ask the prosecutor who has handled the case. She apparently knows everything. Anyway, the case was dismissed after my boss had died.
Но потом, наверное, оно прекращено, потому что умер заведующий, в отношении которого было возбуждено это уголовное дело.
But the records say that you too removed tissue and signed the documents.
В материалах дела, которое было в суде, вот есть ваша фамилия, что вы как бы занимались как раз выемкой органов, правда?
Ну, дело в том, что
I haven't seen the files and can't say anything.
И вот то, что происходило, да, и
What do you think about the business?
дело было возбуждено. Ваше мнение личное?
Is it illegal and dirty?
Бизнес таким вот грязным.
я считаю, что любой бизнес грязный.
All business is dirty.
Все-таки продажа ткани.
Is the tissue trade a particularly dirty business?
Для нас это была работа.
For me, it's just a job like any other. And if you're looking for those making the big bucks, then you have to look somewhere else.
Ну вам платили?
Were you paid?
Ну, платили там.
Well, ridiculously small sums of money.
Ну сколько вот вы
How much did you get for a biopsy?
Это было так мало.
That was so little, I really don't know. I forgot.
Just say it. They also made money out of you.
Well, should I sue them or what?
Ну сколько это было? Ну вот вам платили сколько? Потому что люди зарабатывали на
How many
вас
corpses did you cut up?
большие деньги. Вот
Так
сколько?
что вы
Oh,
предлагаете мне?
few a month, depending on how much they ordered.
Как вы это делаете? Правильно ли?
Were there any supervisors from Europe or the US present?
С биоимпланта приезжали. Они ж как бы уполномоченные.
Well, there was some from the Ukrainian company BioImplant, and then some Germans came, had a look, and went away again.
И уехали.
Что-то вам говорили?
Did they have any complaints?
Ну, какие-то требования
Я
возможно?
немецкий язык не понимаю.
I don't know. I don't have an interpreter.
Alexander, gibt es vielleicht irgendwas zu dem Thema, was er gerne sagen würde, was ihm wichtig ist, was wir aber nicht
Вы
gefragt haben?
хотели, вот, ну, понятно, что мы задали вам
Is there anything that seems important to you? Something we didn't ask?
что очень
Конечно.
важно. Да, я
Конечно, хочу вознаграждение за свое интервью.
Имею право потребовать.
He wants some money for the interview.
Für sein Interview.
Money for the interview? We don't do that.
We can only guess what exactly happens in Ukrainian mortuaries by reading the court files and the witness statements. There seems to be a well-oiled system of deception, blackmail, and trickery. This system ships body parts from the Ukraine via Germany to the rest of the world, especially the US. Here in America, politicians try to get more control over the tissue traders. After the Mastro Marino scandal, the senator for New York called for a law to better oversee the tissue banking industry. Our American reporter colleague, Thomas Mayer, went to interview the senator, whose Safe Tissue Act was never put into law.
Senator, your bill would have overseen this industry. Why did the bill fail?
Well, the industry was opposed to it. They said it wasn't needed. They said that everything is under control, but I had real doubts.
How much need is there for oversight on health and safety with this industry?
There's tremendous abuse here. Certainly the tissue banks are the pressure point, and they should be carefully regulated. That's what we tried to do. Now, it is true, as a result of our actions, they say that the tissue banks are being inspected more frequently, but probably not enough. But no one, not a hospital, not a doctor, not a tissue bank, should have this hear no evil, see no evil, do no evil attitude that it's not my responsibility to make sure that everything's on the up and up.
Should the average person be concerned about that? How concerned?
Well, you should be concerned in several ways. I mean, the greatest outrage was that families didn't know that the tissues were being sold to people who died. And so there's a concern there. But second, if, you know, God forbid you need one of these tissues, you want to make sure you're getting a fully healthy part. And without regulation, you can't be sure of that.
Sir, let me ask you, one of the things that we're finding is that hospitals here in New York are using vendors that obtain cadaver parts in the Ukraine, where there have been questions raised about informed consent, that families who have found out that their loved ones' bodies have been used to provide body parts to these companies here in the United States.
This is an outrage no matter where in the world it happens. To have a loved one have their body hacked apart so that someone can use it without that family's knowledge, consent, is outrageous. And I think every institution has an obligation to check on it and be careful.
To what extent is this human body parts business part of this brave new world of medicine?
Like everywhere else, when technology allows you to do more things, it can do some very good things, but it can also allow some very bad things to happen. And our job is to make sure the bad things don't. When there's no oversight, people can skirt the law, and there's a greater need for oversight. It's improved a little bit since 2006 when we first raised this, but there needs to be a whole lot more.
And so the corpse scandal still continues. Europe and the US are still importing truckloads of donor tissue from the Ukraine. "21 Ukrainian tissue harvesting plants are still supplying raw material for profiteers in the West. And still, nobody is controlling them properly.